are here. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Lopes Goes Last podcast. I, of course, am your host, Tyler Lopes, and I'm so grateful that you are joining me today. Please feel free to subscribe if you have not done so. Also, hit that bell icon so you never miss any one of my videos. Also, like and share so that we can help this thing grow. Also, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at Lopes Goes Last and on Facebook at Lopes Goes Last podcast. Links for those will be down in the description below. Again, I'm so excited to be here this week. I'm feeling a lot better today, so I'm very excited to be able to bring this podcast to you, hopefully at full strength. So I'm very excited to get into it, and so let's jump right into what has been happening this week in the world of sports. It's certainly been an interesting one. I wanted to start out by giving you guys an update on the lawsuit I spoke about in last week's podcast regarding Brian Flores, former head coach of the Miami Dolphins. We talked about that, obviously, again last week. And I wanted to kind of just clear something up that I might not have made clear. I don't want to obviously give you guys any erroneous information, so I wanted to just, again, clear it up if I was at all unclear. So I talked about his interview with the Broncos and how John Elway and his partners allegedly, again, showed up drunk or hungover to the meeting with Brian Flores during that time. I may have insinuated or not made it clear enough that meeting actually took place back in 2019 before Brian Flores was eventually hired to be the coach of the Miami Dolphins. So I did want to make that clear. That meeting did take place in 2019 and not this past offseason, where all of the other allegations for a team such as the Giants, for example, have come out. So I wanted to just make sure that we were on the same page with that. I didn't want to give you guys any erroneous information. But some updates have come through with the lawsuit since the last time I was able to record, mainly just in terms of other people just giving their takes on their stories and telling similar stories to what Brian Flores went through. So Marvin Lewis, who was the former longtime head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals throughout the 2000s and part of the 2010s, basically he came out and said that several years ago he had an interview with the Carolina Panthers, and he had heard on TV that they were going to hire John Fox to be their head coach that upcoming Friday. And basically, so the Tuesday before that upcoming Friday that he was speaking about, he was asked to interview, which was strange to him, obviously, because he had, clearly heard that they were going to hire John Fox. So he found it a little bit odd, but he did eventually go in an interview, and sure enough, that upcoming Friday, as already reported on, the Panthers did name John Fox their head coach. So, obviously, does this necessarily kind of give a cut and dry example, or does this kind of confirm the evidence of systematic racism in the NFL because somebody got wind that they were going to hire John Fox and Marvin Lewis went in for an interview and didn't end up getting it? I don't necessarily think so. However, it definitely does not look good, for sure. It definitely does not help the case here. Or I guess in this case, it actually does help the case of Brian Flores. But it certainly does not look good for the NFL and for the Panthers. And then I almost said Hugh Jackman. That is not the same person. Hugh Jackson, a longtime head coach and coordinator for multiple teams throughout the NFL. As far as I know, he actually has coached every position in the NFL except for the offensive line. So he's been a quarterback coach, linebacker coach, D-line coach, wide receiver coach, all that kind of stuff for all of the NFL. And then obviously he has been a defensive and offensive coordinator and then head coach for many teams. So he came out and said in an interview that while he was coaching the Cleveland Browns, the owner of the Cleveland Browns back then also incentivized him to lose games by paying him extra money for every game that he lost. Now, I will say that, I don't know if the Cleveland Browns needed much more incentive to lose than they already had, because they were pretty bad during his tenure. But, nonetheless, this is now multiple other minority coaches that have come out in support of Brian Flores, and they've also supported multiple aspects of Brian Flores' lawsuit. They're not just kind of settling in on one thing. And so obviously, the NFL and the teams involved in the lawsuit, they have come out and, vehemently denied all allegations, specifically Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, and John Elway, president of the Denver Broncos. They have both come out and basically claimed that all of the things that Brian Flores has been saying were false and defamatory. So, yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be a very messy lawsuit for the NFL. It might be dragged out for quite some time. I will have updates for you as time goes along. But, yeah, this is not really looking great for the NFL. I know that they have already tried taking steps to try and fix things, but obviously this is not going to go away anytime soon if you're the NFL. And, again, I will give you guys updates as we go along. I also wanted to give you a quick update here as to what's been going on with the MLB Lockout. Obviously, I spent a large chunk of the last podcast talking about my thoughts. Not the last podcast, but 2 podcasts ago, I spent quite a bit of time speaking to you guys about my thoughts about it. If you have not seen that, please go watch that before you watch this so that you have a little bit more context, because I'm not really going to go into all the specifics of what the lockout is and how long it's been going on and everything like that. But I am going to give you guys an update. So if you have not seen that video, please do feel free to go back and watch that before watching this update here, so that you have a little bit more context, again, as I said a little bit earlier. So basically, earlier this week, the owners, they pretty much stopped having conversations with the players and the players union, and the MLB attempted to bring a third-party arbitrator into these meetings to try and kind of settle things down. And the MLB, not the MLB, but the players rejected that offer. Now, next steps, from what I hear, are going to be that the MLB is going to kind of get together. The owners are going to try and get together and come up with a new CBA sometime between, Tuesday and Thursday. Now, I am recording this on Monday, the 7th of February, so that would mean tomorrow through the next Thursday. So by the time you guys see this clip, or this podcast, I should say, this might be completely out of date. There may be another update coming up that I will talk about next week, but as of right now, that is the plan. As I said, the MLB tried to bring in a third-party arbitrator this week, and the players rejected it, basically saying that the MLB hasn't really bargained with them. They've pretty much, done their own thing, and then if the MLBPA rejects an offer, they pretty much just leave, and they don't even discuss things. They're not really trying to compromise here. And, the owners, on the other hand, the MLB representation, are saying that the players clearly don't care about the sport or ending the lockout, because otherwise, why would you reject bringing in a third-party arbitrator to basically try and settle things down, especially when there is so much, I can't think of the term that I'm trying to use, but just so much deadlock, there we go, between both sides. So basically, this is not good. This is not good. Very little progress has been made on either side since the last time I updated you guys kind of on what's been going on. And, the most that I've heard up to this point is that the MLB, they did decide to agree on a couple of things that the MLB players have suggested, but I will say, the way that they are going about it is clearly not what the players want. So, what I've heard is that they did try and start a pool of incentives that the MLBPA did want for players that are in years 0 through 3 of their contract, so all of the original renewable years where you're making basically league minimum, and they basically would put a large sum of money into a pool, and the top 30 players by WAR that are in those years will get more money, basically get some of the money from that pool, and it'll be distributed based on how well people perform. Basically, the goal for that is to just give players more money that they're worth. If a guy like Aaron Judge a few years ago comes up as a rookie and as a second-year player and hits 50 home runs, and a lot of people say should have won the MVP that year, clearly he's worth a little bit more than just, some pitcher that only, came up and pitched a couple of spot starts and, that's it. So, or, even better, a guy that gets called up and, hits 210 for the entire year. Obviously, clearly somebody like Aaron Judge would be more valuable than that guy, so they shouldn't be making the same amount of money. So that's basically one of the ideas that the players came up with, and the MLB did agree to start that pool. However, they did agree to only put roughly 10% of the amount of money that the MLBPA asked for in this, so definitely not what the players wanted in terms of the amount that the MLB owners are willing to put in that. Also, the universal DH has been implemented, a three-team draft lottery, and an increase in minimum salary by about $15,000. All of those things have been offered by the MLB, but when you put that up against what the players are asking for, you can clearly see that, while the owners are trying to make out like they are giving the players what they want, by comparison to what the players are actually asking for, it really just doesn't add up. So the players wanted an 8-team draft lottery, and the reason why the draft lottery is such a kind of a prominent fixture in this year's negotiations is because, tanking has been a problem in not just baseball, but in a lot of sports over the last 10 to 20 years. Popularized by the Philadelphia 76ers back in the 2010s. Just trust the process. That was kind of their deal, but basically trusting the process was let's get rid of all our good players and lose every game so that we get good draft picks. So a lot of teams are kind of doing that now. The MLB players are trying to put a stop to that. They don't believe that that's fair. They don't think that that's something that should be rewarded. And so the draft lottery is a way to minimize that because the more games you lose, the higher draft pick you get. But if 8 teams are put into a draft pool and they all have an equal chance, or at least somewhat of an equal chance, or at the very least an increased chance to get that number 1 pick, then it might stop teams from tanking at least more than if you didn't have that. But again, the players are asking for an 8-team draft lottery, and the MLB is only offering 3. They are asking for, an increase of a minimum salary by $100,000, give or take. It might be like 105 or something like that, but pretty much about $100,000 from what it was last year and in the previous years. And then a much, much bigger incentive pool to work with. So the money right now that I believe the MLB owners are deciding to put into the pool is about $10 million for 30 players. And obviously, the higher up you are, the more of that pool you will receive. And the players are asking for something along the lines of like $125 million. Now, again, I do think that number on the players' end is a little bit high. I don't think $125 million is probably going to work, especially on a year-to-year basis. But I don't think $10 million is going to cut it either. I think that they should be able to find some kind of compromise there. Maybe somewhere in the, $35 to $50 million range. Something like that I think that they could agree upon. But again, if the players are asking for $100+ million and you counter with 10, I don't think that's really going to cut it. And then obviously I said that the MLB players wanted to increase salary by about $100,000 in terms of the minimum salary, and the league has countered with roughly, a $10,000 or $15,000 increase per year, which again, by comparison to what the players are asking for, it just isn't happening. There's got to be some kind of middle ground there that they can figure out. Now, every other request, basically, that the players have tried to implement has been either ignored, not addressed, or, just maybe not reported on at this time. Obviously, I only have so much time throughout the day to kind of research and do stuff, so maybe I've missed some stuff. And if I have missed some stuff, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I definitely want to get all this stuff as right as I can for you guys. But again, none of this is good news, of course. As I said, there's been very little progress made over the last couple of weeks. And anybody who's watched or who has watched my video from a couple of weeks ago, you know how I feel about this particular lockout. And again, as I said earlier, if you have not seen that, please go back and watch that. You kind of seen my whole synopsis on this situation. And the players are not happy at this point. And they feel like their hands are tied. They can't really do anything. Obviously, you could definitely make the argument that an arbitrator would have helped But I do feel like at this point where they are, the players don't have a lot of power to work with if they bring an arbitrator in, because I feel like the arbitrator would side more with the owners to try and get baseball season started as quickly as possible. But, the players don't feel like they're really being heard at this point. And, it's been reported on that several members of the players union, by several members of the players union, that it took 43 days for the MLBPA to hear from the MLB and from Rob Manfred. Despite Rob Manfred saying that pretty much, the lockout was implemented so that he can apply pressure to the MLBPA and to the owners to get a deal done more quickly. And, if that's the case, then why in the world would you take 43 days to even send out a message or respond to any of the messages that the MLBPA was offering to you? So obviously, players are not happy, and they are claiming at this point that the league does not even want to bargain. They simply just want to push their agenda, and they want to win. Trevor May, reliever for the New York Mets, came out on a stream. I don't know exactly where the stream was, but he came out on a stream and said a lot of very, very inflammatory remarks about Rob Manfred and made some pretty bold claims about him. And I want to just kind of take you through that quote and read it to you, because I don't want to get this wrong and I don't want to misconstrue his words. I have taken a little bit of kind of like filler stuff out or repetitive stuff out, just for your guys' sake. But if you want to see the full context, definitely you can go find that for yourself. But here is what Trevor May said on his stream about Rob Manfred. This is not in good faith. This is not a mutually beneficial situation. They want to win. So in the past, there has been an element of respect for the game of baseball and tradition and romantic. Like they like baseball. Those things are not on Rob's radar. It's not that important to him. It's that simple. He just doesn't really think about the fan as a fan. He doesn't think about the player as people. He thinks about all of us as a dollar sign. He wants to move the pieces in order to maximize the number of dollar signs that go to his bosses. It's all just manipulation. It's all just a chessboard move. It's a big chess game, and the chess game needs to go to the very, very end to get the maximum benefits for the owners. Not a single negotiation with the guy has been in good faith. He doesn't do things in good faith. Good faith means, I want you to come out of this situation where you're happy. But I also want to be happy. This is more of, he goes, as long as I am happy, I don't care if you're happy. That's the way it's being approached. It's bad faith. Good faith doesn't exist, so stop acting like it was even a possibility. It's just the way he operates. But, I honestly don't know how much clearer a person can be than Trevor May was right there. He clearly feels that Rob Manfred does not care about the players or the fans. He only cares about the bottom line. And it's also pretty clear that other players feel the same way. And maybe even the majority of players feel the same exact way. And, obviously you can make the argument all day long that, players are selfish and that they're greedy. And that's completely understandable for you to feel that way. But if the majority of players, even the ones that are making millions upon millions of dollars, are feeling like their boss does not care about them, I feel like there's probably something to that. And, a lot of players such as Max Scherzer and Jameson Taillon have commented on Twitter and other platforms voicing their displeasure. Scherzer tweeted out, "We don't need mediation because what we are offering to MLB is fair to both sides. We want a system where threshold and penalties don't function as caps, allow young players to realize more of their market value, and make service time manipulation a thing of the past, and eliminate tanking as a winning strategy." Now, again, guys, please feel free to read these tweets read the articles, go see Trevor May's video yourself. Obviously, if I'm going to continue to misread these things, you definitely probably want to go and see them yourself, just so that everything is completely clear. Again, and I don't want to, anybody to rely solely on me and my opinion to get their opinion. I am simply giving you my take on what I feel is happening here with the limited information that I have. So again, please feel free to, research these things on your own. And I would absolutely love to hear from somebody that, has kind of done similar research to what I have and feels that the owners and Rob Manfred are in the right here, because I would absolutely love to, to learn and to hear that side of the story, because there is always two sides to every story, and they always say that the truth is somewhere in the middle when you talk about these kinds of things. But at this point, spring training is in serious jeopardy. I think it's starting in around a week. I don't know the exact date, but from the time I'm recording this, I think it's starting in about a week, maybe a week and a half. So at this point, I mean, spring training has got to be in jeopardy, at least for being shortened here. And the season, honestly, may be in jeopardy if the two sides can't really agree on something by March, which at this point, it seems pretty possible that, there might not be anything agreed upon, because they're not, the players and the owners are not even close to one another in these meetings. And the season, again, it may have to be shortened, which is something that I don't think anyone wants, except for Rob Manfred, who actually tried to shorten the season even more than it was last year during after COVID. So, but we're not going to really talk about that. I don't really want to. But seriously, I understand the players. They shouldn't really expect to get everything that they want, especially on some of the higher amounts, like $100+ million into a pool every year. Raising minimum salary by $100,000 for everybody on top of that. I don't know if the players are going to be able to get everything that they want. And so I don't think the MLB players should expect to get everything that they want. But, I do understand just kind of where the players are coming from in terms of taking the stand that they are, because, they feel like there's virtually no compromises that are happening, and they are getting nothing that they want, other than, again, it's just like a few tiny minor compromises that the MLB is trying to use to say, we're compromising, see, we're giving you virtually nothing, but it's not nothing, it's virtually nothing, and so again, I do understand that, the owners have a job to do as well, and they're trying to do what they think is best for the game of baseball, and they're not trying to lose all this money, but, in years past, the players have backed down in these scenarios, and this year, the players aren't backing down. They are tired of getting thrown around. And, the MLB is going to have to realize that they're going to actually have to bargain, and they're going to have to compromise on these amounts with the MLBPA if they want to come up with a new collective bargaining agreement. Which, by the way, it is called the collective bargaining agreement. So the owners and the players both need to learn how to bargain better in this scenario. So, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. I certainly would love to continue the conversation with you guys. And then the last current event of the day that I wanted to talk about, I meant to talk about this in last week's podcast because it came out, the day before or the day of when I recorded the podcast, but I ended up completely blanking on that, so my apologies. But I did tweet about it. The Washington football team, as they were formerly known by, did finally announce that they are now the Washington Commanders. That will be their new name for the foreseeable future. And again, I tweeted about it last week, so, I don't have much more to add to it if you did see that tweet. But if you didn't, I don't particularly care. I don't particularly care for the name. It's not the best name in the world. It's not the worst name in the world, I guess, but, it's really not that great, at least in my opinion. And I don't particularly care for the new uniforms either, if you guys saw what those look like. They honestly look like my old uniforms when I used to play Pee Wee football, so definitely not all that great. I'm not a fan, really, but, hopefully we'll all warm up to it as time goes along and as we continue just kind of seeing it every day. So, with that, let us move on to Tough Talk. And I would like this week, I want to talk about the Brooklyn Nets. So we are moving back over to the NBA. So if you are a basketball fan, strap in. They have been really struggling lately. Anybody who's kind of followed just generic NBA or just kind of watched First Take or anything like that, you'll know that the Brooklyn Nets have struggled mightily recently, and they're not struggling in the same way that the Celtics struggled sometimes with, inconsistency, and, they might lose, 4 games in a row and then win 3 games in a row and then lose 5 out of 7 and then win 5 out of 7. They're not like that. The Brooklyn Nets are struggling in the I can't win a game in 2 weeks or 3 weeks kind of struggling. Like, they cannot win anything. Now, as of the time of this recording, which again is Monday, February 7th, the Nets have lost 8 in a row and 9 of their last 11 games, which is horrible, obviously. Now, this isn't, it's not a complete death nail into the season of the Nets by any means. It definitely isn't, at least not to me yet. However, there has not been a single team in the history of the NBA to have a 7-game or more losing streak during the season that went on to win the championship. That has never happened in the history of the NBA. So definitely, in a way, this might really derail their season. At one point, I think they were the 2 seed, and now I don't even know if they're in the play-in tournament. I know as of before last night's game, they were the, I think, 7 seed in the East. So, they lost last night again, so they might have even dropped out of the play-in tournament, although they might still be in just barely. But nonetheless, definitely, if the Nets don't win a championship this year, I think that their season has been a complete bust. They have gone all in. They went all in last year, really, to build a roster that was arguably the best in the NBA. And, they did lose Spencer Dinwiddie, who was a pretty good player this offseason, although they didn't have him last year because he did have a major knee injury. But, obviously they built a team to be up there with the favorites to win the championship, if not the absolute favorites to win the championship. They have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, Joe Harris, Patty Mills. They have a lot of really, really, really good players. And, there's obviously guys that I didn't mention that are still really good, like Nick Claxton. I like him a lot. I think he could really, benefit from a lot more playing time. And now that he's, I believe he's starting now for them. And, there's, again, still plenty of other guys that are playing well for them. So, they are an absolute powerhouse, at least on paper, especially with, obviously your big 3 of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, 3 of the best offensive players in the NBA, maybe even ever. But, instead of being that powerhouse they were supposed to be, right now they are sitting at 29 and 24. So, not bad, obviously, but not great either. As I spoke about, this year in the East, it's actually pretty tough. Like, you've got to, a few years ago, if you were 8 games below 500 at the end of the year, you had a chance to make the playoffs. Not this year. You have to be one of the better teams in the NBA to make it out of the East, even with the play-in tournament. You got to at least be around 500. So again, 29-24, not bad, but not great. So, I want to talk about how can a team that went all in, that has so much absurd talent, great coaching, and, just all of pretty much a great front office, everything that you can want, how does a team like that underperform this badly? Now, I've said this in previous podcasts, it's never on one person, especially in the NBA. Now, having one fantastic player is important, but, one player is probably not going to lose you all of these games. So, this season, to me at least, has been a completely perfect storm for the Brooklyn Nets in terms of just having to be bad. So, it's been just a bad storm for them. And it's been so much of a perfect storm that, quite frankly, I find it a little bit remarkable that they're performing well at all. I mean, to me, honestly, it's pretty interesting that they're still hovering around 500. Now, that might be a bit of a stretch, especially since they have so much talent. But why are they struggling to even reach just the bare minimum of expectations of they might not even make the playoffs if they don't turn things around quickly? You know, there are a lot of reasons. And more reasons, honestly, than I can remember any team having at one time. You know, there have been teams that have dealt with a lot of pain and a lot of injuries and a lot of controversy. But in the last 10 years or so, I can't remember a team that has gone through this much craziness and just weird stuff in one season. And, you know, despite all of the talent that they have, it's almost like the planets have completely aligned in the sky just at the right time for the Nets to underperform. So, let's get into what I feel like those reasons are. Now, before I start, I do want to say this segment is called Tough Talk, but I think this is going to be a little bit more of a positive spin on the Nets season. I'm going to kind of defend the Nets a little bit. So if you're looking for me to say that James Harden is terrible, or that Steve Nash is terrible, or that Kyrie Irving is terrible, unfortunately, you're probably not going to find that here. So, let's start with what is obviously wrong with the Nets. Kevin Durant got injured. All right, that's it. You know, that is the only reason. We solved it. Good job, everybody. I'll see you at the same time next week. No, but seriously, no, the Nets are 2-9 since Kevin Durant got injured. And when your best player gets hurt, you know, obviously your team is going to underperform. And not only is he their best player, he's one of the best basketball players on the planet, if not the best basketball player on the planet right now when he is healthy. And he's one of the greatest talents and greatest players that has ever walked the earth. So, you know, you lose a guy like that, your team is going to underperform, clearly. You know, and your team's not that good, or it's not going to be as good, I should say, and it's that simple. But you know what? They still, even without Kevin Durant, have enough talent to be at least beating teams that are at the, you know, scraping the bottom of the barrel, like the San Antonio Spurs or something like that. You know, like they definitely have enough talent to be beating even, you know, mediocre teams, especially the bad ones. But, you know, what else is going on with them then? If that is the case, if they do have all that talent, then what is going on with them? Kyrie Irving, arguably their second best player, probably their third best player, only plays in half of the games right off the bat. Now, obviously that's a big problem. Now, imagine if you knew that before your season started, that, you know, one of your best players, again, possibly your second best player, probably the third best player, is going to be out for half the games no matter what happens. At least half the games, because this is not including any kind of injury or anything that Kyrie Irving may sustain, because he has been injury prone oftentimes in his career. He has had a lot of injuries, so you can never discount that with Kyrie. So again, imagine if you already knew that one of your best players is going to miss half of your games. You probably wouldn't feel nearly as good about how your season is going to go if you knew that fact coming in. So for those of you who don't know, Kyrie Irving has not been vaccinated. So you are allowed in the NBA to play if you are unvaccinated. You just have to follow a certain set of rules. It's a lot like the NFL. You are allowed to play in the NFL if you are not vaccinated. However, your rules for you are a lot stricter than what a person who is vaccinated would have to follow. So, again, you are allowed to play if you're not vaccinated in the NBA. So that is not the issue with Kyrie Irving. And it is not the Nets who are not allowing him to play. The Nets have come out and said that they want Kyrie Irving to play, obviously, all 82 games, and obviously he's a great player, so why wouldn't they? And as I said before, you know, the half of the games is not including any injury, and as far as I know, Kyrie Irving is not injured in any way as we speak, and, gonna knock on some wood over here. Definitely don't want him to get hurt or anything like that. So, if he isn't injured, if you can play in the NBA even though you're vaccinated, and the Brooklyn Nets want him to play, then why is he not playing? Well, the reason is the state of New York itself. That is the reason he is not playing. So the state of New York, they banned unvaccinated people from working in public indoor spaces. And that right now is what is holding Kyrie Irving back. So if you want to work with a large group of people indoors, you have to be vaccinated in New York State. Now, that might not be exactly the right phrasing there, but that's pretty much the reason. Kyrie Irving is not allowed to play because, the point is he's not allowed to play because the state of New York has ruled that he is not allowed to participate with the Nets as long as he is in the state of New York. So, at least half the games, because obviously being the Brooklyn Nets, half of your games are going to be automatically in Brooklyn. Now, there may be other states like California or other states like that, have similar rules to New York that Kyrie Irving already, he can't play there either whenever they play the New York Knicks, who are in their division. They may play them 4 more times. That's another 4 games that Kyrie Irving cannot play automatically. So you might only get, and that's not even including injury, you might only get Kyrie Irving for about 30 or so games this year. So that's even more than half the season. So that makes it even worse. And now you can say whatever you want about his stance against being vaccinated, because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, rightfully so, well then in that case, why doesn't he just get vaccinated? That would be the easiest solution, and I completely agree with you. But I will say, personally, I am a little bit torn on that subject. Part of me honestly admires him taking the stand because he doesn't care about the money, he doesn't care about the consequences, he is taking a stand on what he believes is right and sticking to his convictions for what he believes. And honestly, I said this in last week's podcast, I will never, right, wrong, or indifferent, be mad at somebody for standing up for what they believe in. And he is not a fan of vaccine mandates. He hates that. He wants, freedom of personal choice. And again, you can think whatever you want about that. That's totally fine. Everybody has a right to an opinion on that. So again, for him, his freedom for personal choice is more important than his job, which again, you can say that's right or wrong, but you have to at least somewhat admire him taking a stand for what he believes. Because again, I will never judge somebody for what they believe in. Now, with that being said, while I do admire the fact that he's willing to go through all this and not care about the inconvenience or the scrutiny that he's going to receive, and while I admire because not everybody would have the fortitude to stick to his guns at this point, especially with all the scrutiny that he's had and probably losing a lot of money in the process. Despite all that, I also think that, the stakes are a little bit higher here than personal choice. And, when someone's paying you $30 million, you have a fan base of maybe millions of people, definitely at least hundreds of thousands of people that rely on you. You have 14 teammates that, you're supposed to care about and, be brothers to them. You have an entire coaching staff. You have an entire front office that has committed all of these resources and all of this time and energy and love to you. I think in some ways, he has the responsibility to get the vaccine so that he doesn't let those people down. Now, for me, if I'm even getting a job that's, for $70,000, which is not even close to the number that he's making, and they need me to, get a needle stuck in my arm and get the vaccine, I'm probably going to do that. Just based on the fact of, I want to be able to function in society, And if I need this to function in society, then I'm going to have really no choice but to get it. So I think in a lot of ways, he has a responsibility to get the vaccine. But regardless of anyone's personal feelings on this matter, Kyrie Irving and his absence has been a huge blow to the Nets and a huge blow to their potential for this year. For sure. Regardless of any personal feelings, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that him not being there for the majority of games has really hurt them. Couple that with KD not being gone, and what do you have left? That leaves James Harden. Now, I have been on record many times, not on this podcast, but just in life, where I am a very big fan of James Harden. I think he's one of the best offensive players that has ever lived, and I think that regardless of whether he wins a championship, he will be a Hall of Famer someday. But regardless of all of that, he is having a terrible year by his standards. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves here. He is. It seems crazy, honestly, to say that because he's still almost averaging a triple-double at this point. He's averaging 22 points per game, about, 10-plus assists. I think he leads the NBA at this point in assists per game, and about 8.5 rebounds. He's still almost averaging a triple-double with 20-plus points. So by no stretch is he playing poorly. But by James Harden standards, he is playing poorly. He's playing very poorly. One of the worst seasons of his career, especially since he left for Houston. But, again, I think it is silly to expect James Harden, especially with all of the talent that the Nets have, and there's only one basketball to go around. I think it's silly for us to expect him to still be dropping 30 points a night here with the Nets. But, again, 22 points per game is a bit low. Especially since, again, we already talked about KD's been injured for chunks of the season, and Kyrie Irving hasn't been there. So he has been the number one guy clearly on that team for many, many games. Now, Harden has dealt with some nagging injuries himself, which of course doesn't ever help. But there is more to this than him just playing a little bit poorly by his standards. His effective field goal percentage has nosedived this year. Since 2015, James Harden has arguably been the king of effective field goal percentage, which I have discussed effective field goal percentage in the past. But, again, and he chucks up a lot of threes. That's kind of James Harden's deal. He averages about, 10 three-pointers, three-point attempts a game. He's one of those guys that just can shoot the lights out. That's kind of a big part of his game. So, and as I said, he's been the king of effective field goal percentage because, he does chuck up a lot of threes, and his effective field goal percentage has been really good, even though he's been chucking up a lot of threes, because usually guys that, the big guys, like the centers that are just kind of hovering around the hoop shooting 2-foot shots all day, they're the ones that have really high effective field goal percentages, but his effective field goal percentage has been about 54% pretty much every year since 2015. Which, again, that's so good considering all the threes he chucks up. He could very easily have a 43 to 46% effective field goal percentage with all of the three-point attempts that he takes, because if he's not making them, your effective field goal percentage is going to plummet. But he is making them at a really effective clip, so his effective field goal percentage has been really impressive. But this year it's down to 48%, which, that's a big difference from 54. I know it doesn't seem like it is a big difference, but it really, really is a big difference. He's also been the king of free throws. I mean, James Harden gets to the line so often. It's almost comical how often he would get to the line. It's almost like, the Rockets would have the ball on offense, and you pretty much knew that either James Harden was going to shoot a three or he was going to get to the free throw line. That's pretty much what you expected out of that offense. So again, if we look at the since 2015 marker that we used in the last one, he's averaged over 9 made free throws per game on about 11 attempts per game. So, obviously, there might be a year where that's a little lower or that's a little higher, but on average, that's about where he sits. And he's been pretty consistent with that as well. So there's not a lot of deviation there, but there is a little bit. But again, that's about where his average was. 9 made free throws on about 11 attempts. Last year, though, I will say it was down a lot, but he was going through a lot of crazy stuff last year, so I'm going to give him a pass for that. It is in this year, it's been about 7 made free throws on only 8 attempts. Now, 7 compared to 9 and, 8 compared to 11, that might not seem like it's that big of a drop. And it's not that big a drop, really. But for James Harden, who's been the king of free throws, it's not like him to be shooting free throws that not often, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. So why is this happening? Is it age? Is it James Harden taking a step back, talent-wise? I don't think so. I mean, there has been some talk about his weight and him being a little bit more out of shape these last couple of years. But I don't think it's age. I mean, he's still putting up almost a triple-double on the season. A 22-point triple-double on the season almost. That's his average. So if it is age, then, I mean, I'd be shocked, but I just don't think so. And because that also coupled with he's keeping most of his career averages the same. Like I said, with assists, rebounds, but also steals, blocks, and turnovers. So it's not like, he's turning the ball over more or he's, playing worse defense than he was. I mean, he's a pretty not that great of a defender anyway, so it's not, not like he could play much worse. There have, also been a couple of clips of him just not really trying on defense. That's kind of one of his calling cards. He doesn't try a lot on defense. He can play defense when he's, when he tries at it, but, he doesn't really try at it. That's a problem. But nonetheless, he has kept all or most of his career averages about the same. So, maybe it's him just settling for bad shots this year as compared to, the previous few years, which honestly would make sense considering he's had to kind of makeshift the offense without Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. So that's maybe a possibility. His field goal and three-point percentage have dropped, but I still don't think that tells the full story because his three-point attempts are actually down, and his drive average is actually right about the same as it's been over the last few years. So it's not like he's, taking contested mid-range shots a lot more often than he was. He's actually, taking three-pointers a little bit less and driving about the same or a little bit more. So, I don't think it's that either. I believe all of this, or at least a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but a lot of this it stems from the rule changes that the league has implemented this year. And I don't think it's being talked about nearly enough. So I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit here. So during this past offseason, the NBA changed the rules so that more offensive fouls are going to be called for shooters that use their body in order to draw fouls by doing things like kicking out their legs when they're shooting, using their off arm to kind of, hook defenders behind them or on the side or anything to kind of free themselves up. And arguably, most importantly, leaning into a defender after a pump fake when the defender gets caught jumping in the air trying to block the shot. James Harden was, I know I've said that he's been the king of stuff, but honestly, he has really been almost pretty much the king of scoring in the NBA over the last 5 years, or at least one of them. He's definitely in the royal family. I mean, there's been many years where he's averaged 29, 30, 33 points a game. He's had an unbelievable run. So he has been, I'll use a different word for you this time, one of the masters, let's say, of the last kind of segment that I talked about, which is leaning in after getting a defender in the air. He would pump fake guys, and, the defender would jump at them, and he would just kind of lean in real hard and, go up as if he's shooting and flail a little bit, and the referees would give him the call because that's just kind of the way the rules were, is you couldn't land in the shooter's airspace. You couldn't touch the shooter, when they were shooting. Like, that's just kind of the way the rules were. But this year, now, they've changed the rules so that it's an offensive foul. And, every time that James Harden or anybody else would do that, essentially, they might be behind the three-point line, they might not be, but when they do that, the guy would lean in, the foul would be called, you get 2 or 3 foul shots, and James Harden, like I said, he was averaging 9 made free throws on 11 attempts, so he clearly is a very good free throw shooter, so chances are he was going to go to the line, he was going to knock down both or all 3 of his free throws, and he was going to get an easy 2 to 3 points out of that every time. And it was easy. And if you do that, even just twice a game, let's just say twice a game that happens, something like that happens, or any of the other things that I talked about in terms of the rule change happened, twice a game, that is an extra 3 to 4 points at least. That's not including, if both of them are three-pointers or if you do it more often during a specific game, but that's an easy, probably 4 points for James Harden just off of that move alone. Now that, if you compare that to his scoring output this year, which is about 22 points a game, that takes you, if you assume that it's 4 points, that takes you from 22 points a night to 26 points a night, right there, just off of that alone. But since that weapon has now been taken out of James Harden's arsenal because of the rule changes, his season is now suffering for it. And, it's not just James Harden. He's not the only, it's not like this is called the James Harden rule or anything like that, although there's an argument that it should be. But, there's other players like CJ McCollum and Bradley Beal, guys that also kind of utilize that to their advantage that are also suffering this year. Their stats are taking a nosedive. Bradley Beal was averaging 30 points a night last year, and this year I think he's only averaging about 21, maybe 22 points a night, just like Harden is. Harden is not the only one that is suffering, and their seasons are suffering because of these rule changes. Now, you couple that with, maybe 1 or 2 more missed shots in a game, because again, like I said, James Harden is shooting a little bit more poorly this year on three-pointers and on just regular two-pointers. You couple that with the rule changes, and you're covered. That's your 8 points right there, honestly. I mean, it's really not that hard to kind of wrap your mind around. So, if you can take all of that, all the stuff, all the rule changes, missed shots, everything like that, and you add injuries and underwhelming play from pretty much everybody else other than maybe Patty Mills on the Nets this year, and you now have a recipe for a underwhelming pie. And that's pretty much what the Nets have been. Just underwhelming. Now, all that being said, a lot of teams are underperforming this year, honestly, from what they expected. And some teams are really overperforming this year. But, again, a lot of teams, especially in the East, are underperforming a little bit this year. Although, teams like the Chicago Bulls are blowing everybody away with how well they're playing this year. But, nonetheless, there are a lot of teams that are playing really well this year. But I do think that the Brooklyn Nets will eventually turn everything around. And I think here is my main point for this segment. So all this being said, how the Nets are underperforming, this is the takeaway that I want you guys to have for this segment. This team has gone through a very, very specific and crazy set of unforeseen circumstances this year that, at least in part, has allowed them to underperform. I think that they have gone through such a wild set of unforeseen circumstances and have gone through so much as a team together that once they do get Kevin Durant back, and once James Harden does maybe figure something out, I think that when they turn it around, they are going to be completely unstoppable. Even if Kyrie Irving can't play in home games for the rest of the year, I think that if they stay healthy through the playoffs, if James Harden stays healthy, if Kyrie Irving plays even in just the away games, and Kevin Durant can stay healthy, and all the other supporting members of this team can stay healthy, or at least most of them can stay healthy, if that happens, I think that the Brooklyn Nets will be the NBA champions at the end of the season. I really do. To me, I think that the Nets are going to win this year. Or they're going to get swept by the Warriors. Either one. But, no, but, I think that, maybe you guys should decide what you guys think with that. Tell me how wrong I am. Tell me how crazy I am to think that the Nets are going to turn it around and win the championship. I'd, again, love to be able to continue this conversation with you guys in the comment section. Because let's be honest with ourselves. I think that if they don't win the championship, I think James Harden is out of there. There's already reports about it. There's already reports saying that James Harden is upset in Brooklyn and he doesn't like the fact that he has to run the whole team because that was the problem in Houston. He felt like he was the only one there to kind of pull the weight, and with KD injured all the time and Kyrie only playing in not even half the games, James Harden feels like it's happening all over again. So quite frankly, again, if they don't win the championship this year, I think Harden is gone. I would not be surprised if Harden leaves and the Brooklyn Nets championship window that they sacrificed their whole future for again is closed. Now, what I mean by that, by again, is if you remember back in, I think it was 2012, this trade happened. The Brooklyn Nets traded like their whole future to trade for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and a couple of other players. They traded like 7 first-round picks or something ridiculous like that to the Celtics, and they never made it out of the first round of the playoffs or the second round of the playoffs. Never won anything, and then for, 10 years almost, 7 or 8 years, they had no draft picks. Nobody wanted to go play for Brooklyn. They stunk every year. They had the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick or number 3 pick like every single year, but it was always going to the Boston Celtics. So they couldn't even use the draft. They couldn't even take advantage of how bad they were by using the draft to get good players. They couldn't do that. And now they traded, I don't even remember how many. It's like 8, something like that. Either just outright first-round picks or pick swaps for first-rounders to the Rockets for James Harden. And if Harden leaves after 2 years and they don't win a championship, I mean, they're going to go through another set of just mediocrity and terrible basketball. I would feel terrible for Nets fans if that happened. I mean, they do not deserve that. But, again, if they don't win the championship this year, I would not be shocked if this whole thing just comes crashing down and that championship window is closed for good. But let me know again what you guys think about it in the comments section below. And with that being said, that will conclude Tough Talk this week. And so we are going to move on to the Boston Hour here. Hopefully it won't be an hour. I don't want it to be an hour, and you don't want it to be an hour. So let's just make it all things Boston here. So I'm going to start off by talking about the Celtics. I promise, after this, I'll get into something other than basketball here. But, obviously it's basketball season, so that's just kind of the way it goes. So, on the topic of the Celtics, they've been playing much better lately, excuse me. Since the last time I spoke about them on this podcast, they have been playing much, much better. Since the 23rd of January, the Celtics have gone 7-1. And since January 8th, they have gone 12-4. So they certainly have, been playing a lot more consistently lately. They've been playing a lot better than they were. Their defense has been fantastic as of late. They've given up 100 points only twice in the last 8 games. They're all around playing better. Jason Tatum is fully out of his shooting slump. Jaylen Brown is finally starting to get back in the swing of things, starting to be a little more consistent after his injury. Marcus Smart, honestly, has played really, really well in the little bit I've seen of him. And Robert Williams is almost averaging a double-double this year. He's averaging about 9.5 points and 9.5 rebounds a game. So he's certainly, taking advantage of the big contract he signed in the offseason. And also a little bit more playing time and a little bit more consistent playing time. And he's also, again, we're going to knock on wood here, but, he's also stayed healthy for the vast majority of this season, which has been a problem for him in the past. So certainly that has been great to see. But I think one of the biggest keys to the Celtics' success, especially lately, has been the emergence of Grant Williams as a potential star for them. Now, I will say that his stats are not eye-popping by any stretch. He's averaging 7 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, half a steal, and half a block a game. You know, it's not like he's out there averaging 15 points a night or anything like that. He's not pulling in 10 rebounds. You know, he's not even really playing all that much in terms of, like, minutes. He's not averaging 29 to 30 minutes a game. He's only averaging about 23 minutes a game. So, you know, like I said, nothing that's really eye-popping, but the advanced stats, by comparison, especially to his teammates, are what really stand out to me. And if you guys, you know, haven't figured out yet, I love looking at advanced stats. I think that they really tell much better story of the player than their counting stats ever would. You know, and I talked a couple of weeks ago about his shooting numbers and how well he has been performing in terms of his three-point shooting, and nothing's really changed since then. He's still shooting about 42% from three, which is really, really good, especially considering he definitely did not have that consistent weapon the last 2 years that he has been around in the NBA. You know, he hasn't had that kind of, you know, just absolute sharpshooting ability. He was a decent shooter, but definitely nothing like what I would believe a 42% shooter would look like in his first couple of years. His field goal percentage is actually third on the team, which is pretty cool. It's at 48%, which is not phenomenal, but still pretty good, especially when you consider the two guys that are ahead of him are centers in Rob Williams and Ennis Freedom, who literally do not shoot anything beyond 2 feet from the basket. So when you're shooting as many threes as Grant Williams is, and you're still third behind two guys that are not shooting anything past this far away from you, you know, I think that that's phenomenal. I think he's doing really, really well. He's also shooting 89% from the free throw line, which is a pretty big jump as far as I remember in his free throw percentage this year. And that also means that he is dangerously close to becoming a 50-40-90 player in the NBA, which is honestly, you know, that's not super common. Like that's usually reserved for guys that are super, super efficient, maybe guys that are averaging 20 plus points a night. But Grant Williams on the verge, if he can just kind of improve his numbers a little bit and stay the course in terms of his three-point shooting, you know, he's at 48% field goal percentage, 40% for three, which matches, and then 89% free throws. So if he can just improve a little bit on the field goal percentage and the free throw percentage, he will be a 50-40-90 player, which, again, that's pretty wild. So with all that efficiency in mind, I wanted to say that I think that along with Al Horford kind of being a little bit inconsistent, you know, a little bit inefficient in terms of his offense. He's only shooting about 29% from three, which is just not good enough. I think that Grant Williams would be better as the starting power forward instead of coming off the bench, and Al Horford should shift to the bench for the Celtics. Now, Al Horford does bring a lot on the defensive end for sure, you know, especially on the interior, because, you know, he's obviously much taller. He's obviously just been around a lot longer. He's a little bit stronger in terms of just kind of posting up against big guys. And, you know, Grant doesn't really necessarily have that, at least not yet. But I do think Grant is just a better fit with the rotation of the starters that are out there right now. And honestly, I would prefer to see Big Al coming off the bench a little bit more and just kind of being the leader of that second unit that I think it desperately needs. You know, obviously you got Dennis Schroeder, who's leading the second unit right now, but I think that it could go for just a little bit more leadership, especially given what we're going to talk about here in a minute when it comes to Dennis Schroeder. You know, and I think Big Al, you know, he'd be able to spell Robert Williams a little bit more, and Ime Udoka, I know he likes Al Horford a lot in terms of just kind of that pairing, but you know, his offense has been pretty lackluster this year. And, you know, I think that he would be a little bit better served, you know, and even if you wanted to play Rob Williams a couple less minutes to kind of try and keep him rested, keep him healthy. He has had some injury troubles, of course. You know, you can do that when you have Al Horford coming off the bench instead of playing alongside him all the time. You know, you can still play Al Horford the 25, even 28, 30 minutes a night if you want to, but just have him come off the bench, have him spell Rob Williams, and sometimes you can play them together when Grant Williams needs to go sit down. But I think Grant Williams would be a little bit better. And I know again, I mentioned Ime Udoka a little bit earlier. He does like the passing ability that Al and Rob have together when they're on the floor. I know, they're both pretty good passers. They both have really good passer vision. They can see the floor really well. And, when you got guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum who are not the best in terms of that area, I completely understand where he's coming from in terms of that combo and their ball movement ability. But I do still think Grant Williams can help space the floor and open up driving lanes for Tatum and Brown much more than Al Horford can, especially right now. I know he does step back and shoot a lot of threes, but he's just not making them at an efficient clip, or at least not as efficient as he would like to be. And honestly, Grant Williams is no slouch on defense either. He can certainly be a versatile defender. He certainly showed a lot of promise in that area, at the very least in his rookie season, especially in the playoffs. I saw him locking up guys. It was really, really fun to watch, and I haven't seen as much of that, obviously, in the last couple of years. But he's still definitely no slouch. He's definitely above average at the very least in terms of defense. Obviously he's not as potent on the interior as a guy like Al Horford is, but he's still obviously very good on defense. But you know what? Hey, Celtics are winning right now. They're winning right now, so there's no reason to change anything. But and we'll see if we can if the Celtics can keep this going, and see where it goes, and see if Grant Williams gets some more playing time, because I think he deserves a little bit more playing time, or at least maybe not necessarily more playing time, but I think a little bit heavier role in the offense than he has been getting so far this year. Now, it is getting close to the All-Star break, which means it's also getting close to the trade deadline for the NBA, which is a very exciting time, especially for people like me that, in a lot of ways, I enjoy the off-season and free agency and trade talks and stuff like that more than I actually enjoy the season, except for maybe playoffs. But, I did want to take a couple of minutes and talk about the rumors swirling around the Celtics building over there in Boston. And at this point, it doesn't really seem like the Celtics are going to be making any kind of big splash move. Like, there have been rumors in the offseason using their trade exceptions that are pretty substantial in terms of the finances for that. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. It doesn't seem like they want to add any salary. In fact, it seems like they want to take salary away. They're trying to get underneath the luxury tax right now. And right now, the Celtics are sitting right around the $2.8 million mark, being over the luxury tax. So they're over by about $2.8 million. But I did read that if Jaylen Brown does not make the All-Star team as an injury replacement player, then that number will go down to about $900,000, because clearly it sounds like Jaylen Brown has some incentives and increases in his contract if he makes the All-Star team versus if he does not make the All-Star team. So we'll see kind of how that shakes up. But as of right now, $2.8 million above the luxury tax is where the Celtics sit. So there are a couple of things kind of going on in terms of trade rumors that I wanted to report to you guys. First and foremost, it seems like the C's are trying to move on from Dennis Schroeder, or at least entertaining the idea of moving on from Dennis Schroeder. And honestly, I can't blame them. I mean, he hasn't been great this year. He hasn't been bad by any stretch. He's the third leading scorer on the team. He's averaging about 14 points a night right now. He hasn't been bad, but it's been a little bit underwhelming considering the expectations were, he was going to get back to averaging, 18 to 20 points a night and all that stuff. But, he hasn't done really anything special. He started a little bit, but primarily he comes off the bench. He hasn't really been very efficient. So, those are all kind of arguments where I can see the Celtics wanting to move on. But he is only making $6 million, so, that's really not that bad for a guy that's putting up almost 15 points a night. And, he really helps solidify that second unit for the Celtics, which, we were talking about earlier. He's really definitely, at the very least offensively, the leader of that group most of the time. So I can definitely see both sides of it. I could see why the Celtics would want to move on from him, because he has been a little bit underwhelming. But I can also see an argument for them keeping him, because he isn't making that much money. And he is a leader of the second unit. But, for me, I do think, I will say, if you do get a really nice offer for him, go for it. I'm not super attached to the idea of him remaining a Celtic this year. But if you don't really get an offer and you feel like keeping him and that's the best option, then, completely I understand. And I certainly would not mind him sticking around. But with that being said, Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report is reporting that the Milwaukee Bucks and the Chicago Bulls have discussed swapping for Dennis Schroeder at different points throughout this process as the trade deadline creeps up. The Bulls have discussed trading Troy Brown and a second-round pick right now. Troy Brown is a backup power forward over there in Chicago. I'm not super familiar with his stats or anything like that. Obviously, he's a decent young player. Hasn't had too much run in Chicago, especially given how much talent they have over there and how well they've been playing. He doesn't really get the ball much, but that's kind of the latest thing that the Bulls and Celtics have discussed is Troy Brown and a second-round pick for Dennis Schroeder. Now, I'm not really sure how great of a value this is. Again, I'm not super familiar with Troy Brown, but it's not terrible, especially if you do want to get under the luxury tax and avoid those multi-year penalties later down the road. So I can certainly understand why the Celtics would want to go after that, but obviously they haven't accepted that trade offer, so maybe the Celtics are looking for a little bit more. And there hasn't really been a report on what the Milwaukee Bucks are specifically looking for. So there's just kind of more speculation on that. So there's not really a whole lot to report on it, but other than the fact that the Bucks have had the conversations for trading for Dennis Schroeder, I personally hope that if the Celtics do pull the trigger on a Milwaukee Bucks trade with Dennis Schroeder, I'm hoping that we could get back Dante DiVincenzo. I like him a lot. It's also been reported that the Celtics have tried to trade for Jalen Smith, the backup center for the Phoenix Suns. I'm not really sure. I like Jalen Smith a lot, but to me, I'm not really sure how he fits in the Celtics, rotation, considering you already have Rob Williams, Al Horford, Enes Freedom, Bol Bol, Bruno Fernando, all playing, the center or big guy position, so that you just kind of be adding another body there, just sticking him at the end of the bench probably, because I don't, he's obviously not better than Rob, he's not better than Al, he's probably not even better than Cantor. I don't think he's better than Bol Bol. I really like Bol Bol a lot, and I hope that, once he gets healthy, he'll have a little bit of a run there. Arguing, he might be better than Bol Bol, and he's probably better than Bruno Fernando, but at the same time, I just don't see the need for that right now. But again, I do like him. I do like him a lot, but obviously the Suns, they didn't accept that trade, clearly, so, they might not really want to do that anyways, at least not yet. And there are also rumors that the Minnesota Timberwolves are trying to trade for Marcus Smart and Josh Richardson. I'm not sure if they're trying to package that together or if those are two separate deals that they've talked about. But also the Utah Jazz are also trying to trade for Josh Richardson. So a lot of kind of things moving around. So we'll see what happens with all these rumors, and I'll give you guys updates as this goes along. And we'll see what the Celtics ultimately decide to do at the deadline, if they do try to move some of their bigger contracts like a Marcus Smart or a Josh Richardson, or if they try and trade Dennis Schroeder, or if they keep all these guys and just kind of stay the course and just try and move the luxury tax around another way in the offseason. Moving on from the Celtics, the last thing I want to talk about this week is, I want to talk a little bit about the Pro Bowl, specifically Mac Jones in the Pro Bowl. I'm not a big fan of the Pro Bowl. I think it's pretty pointless, especially the game itself. Anybody who watched this year's game, it was just bad. I mean, guys really don't even try. At least a lot of them don't. So, I don't really want to talk about necessarily Mac Jones' performance in the game, although he did look really good at certain points. But I more so wanted to talk about his personality and just kind of the things that he showed during the event and during the game, just kind of personality-wise. I think he showed his fun side. I think he showed a lot of personality and a lot of, the fun that he was having, which is great for a young QB. I mean, the fact that he made the Pro Bowl, even as an injury replacement, as a rookie in New England, I think that's really, really great for him and his confidence. And he definitely, he participated in a lot of the skills competitions and stuff like that. He obviously played a lot in the game, which is great to see. And he handled himself really well. And it was, again, really nice to watch. The Pro Bowl itself, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's an absolute joke. I mean, I don't really want to talk about, how somebody looked during the game in terms of like their performance or stats or anything like that. Like, I think every quarterback probably threw in at least one interception, and it just was it's not a great game to watch. So for me, it's more important, especially for a young quarterback, to kind of just see how they handle themselves, how they handle all that pressure. How much fun can they have? Are they taking it too seriously? Are they not taking it seriously enough? And I think Mac Jones really kind of played an even keel kind of deal where he had a lot of fun in certain areas, but then obviously he didn't let that, he didn't throw 10 interceptions in the game because he was trying to be an idiot or something like that. So, he handled himself really, really well, and he had a lot of fun. He conducted himself, quite frankly, like a veteran, like he's been conducting himself all year. And I'm excited for him. I'm excited to see kind of how he handles his first offseason. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what next year brings, and we'll definitely talk more about Mac Jones and the Patriots and what I think they should do, what they will do, and then ultimately what they do end up accomplishing in their offseason in the coming weeks and months. But that is going to be it for me this week. A little bit shorter of a podcast this week than usual, but that's just kind of how it goes. I'm so grateful for you guys for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Hey guys, me again. I just want to say thank you so much for checking out the Lopes Goes Last podcast. It means the world to me that you decided to stick all the way to the end. That's super cool. So thank you again. And if you really, really like what you see, I'd love for you to subscribe, like the video, and share it with all your family and friends because, this is my passion project. This is what I love to do, and I really want the sucker to grow. And the only way that can happen is through you guys, is if you guys can help me out. So again, if you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video, share with all your friends and family. That's the only way this is going to grow. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.